Welcome to the Contagious Code Podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I'm Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Spotify, Zeta, Vercel, and more. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by my good friend, my hero, and a colleague and a mentor, without him even knowing it, Kyle Simpson. Kyle Simpson, for those of you who don't know him, is the author of the You Don't Know JavaScript and renamed the You Don't Know JavaScript Yet series of books. This book has sold across a variety of mediums. In fact, all of Kyle's writings have sold across a variety of media, over 300,000 copies to date, and are really the foundation of excellent JavaScript skills. It's maybe a lesser known secret. I don't want it to be a secret, but I actually learned JavaScript in detail from these books back in 2016 or 2017. I dove deep and I consumed it like somebody who hasn't seen knowledge and food in a long time. I just went absolutely ham on these books, and I genuinely believe that Kyle Simpson, through his content, through these books, has given me the career that I have today. So this is a special episode for those reasons. Kyle is an absolute institution of a human being who thinks deeply about code, and in fact, who probably knows JavaScript deeper than most others. We do have a podcast episode coming out with Ujwal Sharma. He's the chairperson of the technical committee that makes JavaScript, so perhaps he knows Kyle better. But without digressing, this is a very special occasion because we talk about publishing a book, either self-publishing or going with a publisher. We talk about Kyle's journey through to publishing You Don't Know JavaScript Yet, and we talk about all the nuance in between. To that end, we talk about O'Reilly and the institution of that, and we talk about self-publishing and when you should do either. There's a real takeaway here for those of you thinking about writing a tech book, whether to self-publish or to not, and the trade-offs between. There's also real takeaways for you who wonder about JavaScript in depth, like what are the details that I may be missing. If in fact you have any exposure to JavaScript, this episode is for you. We also discuss the trade-offs between, like, if you know something so deep, do you become less employable because of the depth of your knowledge? And so on and so forth. Finally, we talk about the tech industry as a whole, how sometimes we prefer moving fast with hype-driven technology as opposed to deeply understanding something and taking the time to do so. Ship culture, a culture where the mass market capitalism sort of is the tail wagging the dog as opposed to the other way around. Finally, we touch on Kyle's new venture, Vella.ai. That's Vella.ai, a new startup aimed to make AI proactive, to reach out to you and help you with things that you may be not thinking about based on your connectedness of your life, so your social media accounts and so on. So it's a jam-packed episode full of takeaways, from writing a book to the depths of JavaScript to career to industry to finally the AI startup, and I hope you enjoy all of it. Now, I'd love to offer all of this to you for free at no cost. But there are costs involved, just of time alone. I mean, this is a pretty time-intense episode, as all are. But there's also costs of production, equipment, editing, marketing, all of this. And so it is a costly operation, but the goal is to give this to developers and interested people for free forever. And to help with that, we have sponsors. This episode is sponsored by Stately.ai. Stately is a visualizer of state charts and machines that can help you sort of map out the logic flow of your applications before you start building. Download your state flow, your state chart, as a JSON document, and then just fill in business logic. So you can say I go from state A to state B, and model that using the Stately visual editor, and then in code describe it with your business logic. So you download all the state machine and its transitions, and you just sort of fill in the blanks based on how you go from state A to state B in your specific domain. It is an excellent tool, and in my opinion should be part of any developer workflow to help understand applications better, thereby mitigating errors and providing value to customers. So if you want to check that out, it's over at stately.ai. This episode is also sponsored by Code Crafters. That's codecrafters.io. Code Crafters is a way of learning and educating yourself as a developer in depth, and that's very much on brand with this podcast, because with Code Crafters, you build Git from scratch, you'll build Docker from scratch, you'll build Redis from scratch in a language so you understand the underlying mechanism and up-level your skills. With Code Crafters, if you use the link that is tej.as/codecrafters, you will be able to enjoy it and also support the podcast. So Tejas, tej.as/code crafters to get a hold of that. And I do appreciate your support here. So without further ado, thank you for sticking around. And now for my discussion with Kyle Simpson. Kyle Simpson, dude, it's such an honor to have you on the Contagious Code podcast, and I can't wait to dive into all of the interesting JavaScript and other topics we're going to discuss.
Tejas, thanks so much for having me, man. You're such a good, cherished friend, and I was thrilled at the opportunity when you asked.
Oh, this is so great. Honestly, I've broken up this episode into like 7 major themes, but before we get into the nitty gritty, I'd love
Only
it if you could.
seven. Only seven.
And we may do 3, we may do 14, depends on the style of discussion. I actually appreciate this. Every podcast guest is different and has a different sort of conversational cadence, and so we'll see how we go. But before we do, I'd love it if you could give our listeners a little bit of an introduction to yourself and what you're into these days. I mean, as the person who literally wrote not just the book on JavaScript, but the 7 books, I believe, or even the 8 books, if you consider Functional Light on JavaScript, I'm sure you need no introduction, but if you wanted to spend some time, I'm sure the listeners would appreciate it.
For sure, for sure. Well, welcome anyone that's listening in. As Tejas mentioned, I am probably most known in the JavaScript community for the You Don't Know JS books. There was a first edition published through O'Reilly, and that was about a decade ago now, which makes me feel really old. That first edition did have 6 books in it, published through O'Reilly in 2014 and 2015. And then there was a long gap where people kept saying, when are you going to update the books? And over that period of time, I was feeling, shall I say, constrained by the traditional publisher model. And no disparagement to O'Reilly, but they were not really in the business of supporting authors at that time. They were kind of contracting that. And so I branched out and said, look, I want to go forward with You Don't Know JS, but it doesn't make sense to me to keep doing so in the traditional publishing model. And I'm glad that in the spirit, when I approached them first, and this was in 2012, I think, when I first talked to my editor, Simon, I approached them with a kind of non-traditional model. I was like, I don't even know if anybody's going to buy books like this. I'm not sure that there is an audience. And it's funny because I remember I was having drinks with my editor, Simon. He and I are good friends, and we were sitting in a bar here in Austin, Texas. And I was like, look, I did some very rough estimates. And I feel like across all the books, there were going to be 3 at the time. And I was like, across all the books, if I can sell 2,500 copies, I'm good. Like, I feel like that will be a success. And he's like, okay, that's reasonable. And to date, I don't have any way of tracking now at this point, but to date, I think it's well over 300,000 copies that have been sold across all of those books and multiple editions and all that. But anyway, the point I was trying to make is that I went to them with this non-traditional pitch, which said, I think 2,500, but I don't even know if that's remotely reasonable. So let's do this Kickstarter and we'll see if there's an audience there. And instead of you paying me in advance, the way publishers, typically used to do, maybe that's not even a thing anymore, but they used to pay advances. And I was like, instead of an advance, just let me keep the Kickstarter money, but you promised to provide books to any of my backers. So it was kind of like this win-win-win triangle. And I was like, I don't know if they're going to go for it. And they did, to their credit, to Simon's credit for pitching it and fighting for it. And so I was glad that, from those roots of this sort of, we started our relationship in this non-traditional way. They embraced the idea, or they came around to the idea, I guess I should say. It took a while, but they came around to the idea of, yeah, you can have the rights to You Don't Know JS back, and you can go and do different things with it. So I then, in 2000, right before the pandemic started, put out the first 2 books of the second edition. Second edition's You Don't Know JS Yet. So there's just to clear up some confusion. This was a long way of saying I want to clear up confusion, because people sometimes refer to this as a single book, like you wrote the You Don't Know JS book. So just for the record, there are 6 titles in the You Don't Know JS first edition series. And then there's a second edition series called You Don't Know JS Yet, second edition. And I'll talk about the yet here in just a moment. But to clear up the status of the second edition, because I get this question a lot, there are 2 officially fully published books in that series. There is the Get Started book, which replaces first edition's Up and Going. Then there's Scope and Closures, which goes by the same title in both editions. Both those have been published. They are available for sale. Please go buy them. You can buy them wherever books are sold. They're available both in print from Amazon and digitally in several places, including Leanpub. So wherever you'd like to get those, I'd love you to buy those. The next two books in this series, which went by slightly different titles, those are draft complete, meaning I don't really have much more plans to write on those books. They are, I would say, 95% of the way toward what I would have said, and I'm basically kind of done with that. And so those, they didn't get a lot of editing or whatever, but they're draft stable, I guess maybe is a better way of saying that. So go read those, and you can read those completely for free on the GitHub repository. That's books 3 and 4. So that includes Objects and Classes, which replaces the This and Object Prototypes book from first edition. And then the second edition, Types and Coercion, which replaces Types and Grammar from the previous edition. So anyway, that's the status. Books 5 and 6 of the second edition. One was going to be the sync and async book, and one was going to be the ES Next and Beyond book. For different reasons, which we can dive into if you want. It's a long story. But for different reasons, probably neither one of those books is going to happen. So they are just there as title placeholders, but I don't have any active plans to write those. So that's what you can say about second edition, and hopefully that sets the record straight on the status and future plans of the series.
I so appreciate using the medium of my humble little podcast to set the record straight on the status of your books.
I'm going to point everybody at your podcast and say, go, stop asking me, go watch the episode.
That is a huge honor for reasons I'll probably outline in your intro to this episode. And for those listening, you've already watched the intro, and so you'll know what I'm talking about. Anyway, you mentioned a number of things that I think are so interesting. One, I just, at the time of recording, and so people are going to get this way later, but whatever, it's just maybe a month or so out, I just published my first book with O'Reilly. And I want to know if, without, thank you for the applause for those listening only, Kyle's clapping. I appreciate that. I want to know about these feelings of being constrained. And I want to know about it in a way that captures the nuance of the situation. I think nobody's really interested in listening to disparaging remarks about O'Reilly. I don't think any are going to happen, but I just need to preface that. I do know the author experience lends differently for different creatives. Like for me, for example, I felt very appreciative. So I had this developmental editor. Her name is Shira Evans. She is an angel. Sent by God, if you believe in one. Honestly, because Kyle, I'm a procrastinator and I don't finish what I start. It's a miracle that we're recording this episode, frankly. And so I felt that the only way I would actually publish this thing is with Shira, with Shira like holding me accountable, put it that way. With Shira going, hey, how's chapter 3 going? And me going, oh my gosh, I didn't even start. And then texting her that it's nearly done, and then the pressure would help me finish it. Shira, if you're listening, that didn't happen. That's totally fictional. But I'm curious, what was your authoring experience like, and where did these constraints come from? And I'm asking because maybe there's somebody listening who wants to write something, right? And so what would you say to them?
Yeah. So let me first say that I am thankful and will forever be thankful that O'Reilly took a chance on me at a time when I wasn't nearly as well known in the space. I had worked with O'Reilly before, just for full disclosure. I was a contributing author on the HTML5 cookbook. I wrote the JavaScript chapters of that book with Christopher Schmidt, who is he has since passed, but he's one of the real founding fathers of the web, in my view, and he honored me by asking me to help him co-write that. So I had worked with O'Reilly before. That's how I knew Simon as the editor. But as my own author, relatively unknown, and was really grateful that they took a chance on me. That was a very different time, though. Very different time for the way that people consume media. And it's hard in 2024 brain to reason very clearly about what was going on in 2012 and 2013 and 2014. And in fact, probably half, maybe 3/4 of your listeners weren't even in the industry, right? And that's just a fact, right? So it's
scares
very
me
different.
that there's...
And I want to give that context because what I'm going to say about that experience doesn't necessarily translate to the way life is here in 24. But anyway, my experience was that I had somewhat of a platform. I was a conference speaker and things like that, but I did not really have any sort of established track record as a writer. And while I felt like I could communicate really well and I was really good in the spoken form, it was yet to be determined whether that same voice could come through in written form and be appreciated. And I think the structure of having editors to come in and say, this is working and this isn't, was critical. And I'm glad for it and I'm appreciative of it. They were very supportive. Simon was a fantastic editor, and I worked with several other people at O'Reilly. Almost all of them have moved on from O'Reilly, I believe, but a lot of those same names. And I also was very involved with O'Reilly in a lot of other aspects. I was involved in a lot of their conferences, program committee for a number of conferences, volunteer. I even served as co-chair of the Fluent conference for the last 2 runs of that conference. I wish they weren't the last 2 runs of the conference, but that was when O'Reilly decided to kind of pull out of conference events. And so I had a lot of exposure to O'Reilly, a lot of support, a lot of people that I knew, and overwhelmingly, I feel very positive about that time. But that doesn't mean that all chapters are meant to continue forever. And so in the spirit of the book metaphor, that chapter was good for me, but that chapter wasn't the rest of the story. What I mean by constraints is that I had a lot of things that I felt like I wanted to do with the brand, You Don't Know JS, that I felt like the books would be supportive of. And I was regularly going to O'Reilly and talking to them about, how about we do this kind of thing? And we use the books to support and market and vice versa. And they just weren't super creative. Like, they really could not get out of the box of, we make books. And I felt that was weird because they were a media company. Like, O'Reilly Media is the name of the company. I was like, let's push the definition of that. And this is probably the harshest thing I'll say about them, but I think they were really uncreative, that the only thing they could think of that media meant to them was put it on the streaming platform, the Safari online platform. That's all they were interested in. And all the other things that I wanted to do, it's not like I was told you can't do, but I didn't have that same support. And I felt like without that support, it would be disjointed. And that's really why I drove to say, look, I need this brand back. I need the rights to this brand back, because whether I write books or whether I do podcast, whatever, I want that freedom to have a coherent brand, strategy around it. And, to their credit, it took them a while, but to their credit, they were willing to do it. They eventually said, look, we'll sunset the first edition. We'll stop selling it. You have the name, run with it, do with it as you will. So that's I'm awesome. Thankful that clean break happened and we've moved on.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that context. It's so valuable for me and everybody else to be aware of going into potentially writing books. So you got the rights to this thing, you got it back, you got all your ownership of the brand back, and you mentioned you've sold a number of copies. I think it was 300.
That's but across all books, all editions, etc. I'm just sort of rolling up the number, but yes.
Right. That's still significant. I mean, it's over 250,000. I wish one day that I'm able to say such a thing. But regardless, you also give away the book a lot for free on GitHub. That's how I learned. So I learned JavaScript, and the listeners are absolutely no stranger to this. I learned JavaScript from you. You didn't even know it at the time, but by reading the book on GitHub. And I believe it's still available. We'll put links in the show notes to this. I think the second edition's in a separate branch, but it's available for free. How does that affect your sales? Do you think you would have sold a lot more had it not been on GitHub? What was the motivation for it? Maybe besides the altruistic, I just want this to be accessible to everybody.
Yeah, well, let's not discount that a deep belief, almost a religious belief of mine, is that the things that I produce, I always want them to be as accessible as I possibly can. I've spent 25 years in this industry, and the last 15 of them have been all about what can I do for the broader web community as a big umbrella with a lot of things in it, and a lot of things that I don't even like or agree with, but it doesn't matter because the big umbrella is what matters. And I've tried to have my way of contributing and pushing that forward. And I didn't do that so that I could make money off of selling the books. Let's just be clear on it. I am grateful for the money that I've made off of selling the books. It didn't make me a millionaire or anything like that, but I'm grateful that I sold the books and they did well. And they sold, as I told you earlier, a couple of orders of magnitude more copies than I ever could have dreamed or imagined. I still can't really believe that. I do know that to be concretely true, but still hard to wrap my brain around. There are so many people that have read it. When I went to O'Reilly the first time with the Kickstarter thing, I said, I'm an open source developer and the web platform is what I'm about. And just so you know, this deal comes contingent with, I'm going to release the copies of the book under the common attribution license or whatever that thing is called. I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to release that on my GitHub because it's no different in my mind than when I write a line of code in an open source library. It's not really a different medium. It sort of is, but it's not really a different medium. It's my way of contributing something back, sharing some kind of knowledge back. And they were like, yeah, that's totally fine. We've had a few authors do it. It's not very common. This is what they were telling me in 2012. We've had a few authors do that, but it's totally fine. You can do that. So they were supportive of that. And again, props to them for supporting it. As we got into the process, after there were books out and I was going to O'Reilly conferences and events, and they were doing book signings, which I imagine you'll probably have at least some opportunity to experience. And I loved that. I loved getting to connect to people. And at a book signing, they're giving my book away for free. And certainly in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, this thing that I'm holding in my hand, it does have a retail price attached to it. And it would be awesome if I were getting $1 or $2 or whatever from each of these. So at first, I did have a little bit of reticence about, look how many copies that are getting. But again, to O'Reilly's credit, we had a lot of conversations about it. And O'Reilly said, and I saw it to become true, and I now fully believe it. They said the more copies of this book, the more copies of any book that we give away, the more copies we sell. 100%. The more copies we give away, the more we sell. And I was like, oh, well, that just completely fits with what I've already said about all of my content. Of course, that makes sense, right? Like it was not a big leap for me to get there. So I have no idea how many people have read the You Don't Know JS, any part of it online for free. But I bet that it's probably at least an order of magnitude more people than ever bought the book. Probably.
I didn't even know O'Reilly was involved. I found the book in 2016 or something, and it sounds like this was when you had the rights back and so on. And I think your viewpoint here is so beautiful, and I need to call attention to it because I feel like the default assumption of giving a book away for free on open source is, this means I'm not going to make as much money because it's free and nobody's going to buy it. But what you've just said is the opposite.
It's the opposite.
That is
I cannot tell you how many, I'm not even exaggerating when I tell you hundreds of times I've been told by people in person or, online. I've been told by people, I read your books for free and then I bought them later to support you, to thank you. Okay. So let me just dispel the myth that there's just this widespread perspective that if I read it for free, then I'm never going to pay anything. People, if people are genuinely benefiting from it, they find their ways to give back. And not everybody's bought a book, but I'll just get random stuff. Like somebody will be like, send me $1 on PayPal. And I'm like, thank you. Right. And for them, $1 could be like a week's wage. I don't know. I don't know these people. I don't know what their life story or where they're from, but people just do that in ways to give back. And I absolutely haven't spent a moment of my life wondering how many people out there would have bought it if I force them to buy it and haven't given it away, because I've spent all the rest of my brain power and my life so thankful that so many people have benefited from it. So many people have gotten jobs from it. So many people have gone on to make hugely popular open source libraries based upon some of that knowledge that far trumps any of the possible, like, gee, I wonder if I could have sold 2 more copies if I had made it exclusive. It's a no-brainer for me, and I will continue to do that. I don't know if I'm going to write any more books, but if I ever do, I'm going to continue to keep using the exact same model.
That's so cool. And for what it's worth, I've said on record multiple times, that's the reason I have the career I have today. No question. Absolutely non-negotiable. So I thank you for myself, but also on behalf of literally everybody who has built that career on your books. You mentioned, so actually, when you just mentioned this thing about like giving stuff away, paying more than not giving stuff away, you reminded me of one of the consulting clients I work with. So right now, for those listening, the way I actually get paid, I wish it was by podcast sponsorships. It's not. It's from consulting. And I will say this: I one of the clients I have, and I don't say this disparagingly at all. I need to be very clear, but one of the clients I have, they are a startup that is making revenue, but not enough. As is the case with Planet Scale. I don't know if you saw that, but they're prioritizing profit. That's what they said. And they laid off like 100 people 2 days ago at the time of recording. But anyway, this company, they're not doing any of that. They are like trying to grow revenue. And the way they're doing that is by the moment you like log in to use their SaaS product with GitHub, you're taken to a like enter your credit card screen. And there is not a link you can click without redirecting back to the credit card, effectively saying once you enter this credit card, then you can use the thing, and only then can you use the thing. And what you just mentioned about your book is the opposite. And Lee Robinson from Vercel has an excellent blog post about this where he outlines the important, we'll put a link in the show notes, where he outlines the importance of you must have a free tier if you're going for bottom up. That is, if you're catering to everyday developers, you need to give people a taste of what they're paying for, so they pay for it. And I like how you're taking this and sort of adding more weight to the idea that instead of just having a free tier, have a free offering, have a free product, and then the sprinkles on top you could maybe charge for, or you could even just accept donations, sort of like Signal. I use Signal as my primary messenger, not WhatsApp, and they run on donations. And I think there's some truth to that. In fact, and I'm starting to ramble, I apologize, but there's a thanks, no financial relationship to them at this point in time, but they are a company that are trying to fund open source. And how they do it is really cool. When you log in with GitHub, they look at all your repos and the dependency graphs of all your projects, and they show you like these are the maintainers of the lowest level of your package JSON. And then they offer you this mechanism where you can like pledge an amount, $100, $20, $20,000, and they evenly distribute it based on how much you depend on various maintainers. And it's free. And the way they make money is by tips. Literally, you can be like, look, I want to give 200 to the maintainers, but here's a $20 tip for your service as the software. And I think that's so cool. So anyway, I think there's lots of takeaways here for practical monetization that benefits people at scale while also benefiting the creator, aka you in the case of this book. You mentioned accessibility is like central to everything you do. You want your books to be accessible to the vast majority of people, not just your books but your content, so that they can build their best careers and thrive and really be included in the ecosystem. I want to tell you a little bit of a story, and then I want to get your take. The story is this: I just, as mentioned at the time of recording, I had just published this book by O'Reilly, or with O'Reilly, by me, and I sort of see it as an accomplishment, not in the way that LinkedIn sees it an accomplishment. I think they maybe blow it a little bit out of proportion, but for me, I remember as a child, I was 13 years old or so, and I saw a number of O'Reilly books. And I thought, wow, I know how to code. People write books about this. People publish books about this. That is so cool. I wish one day I get to publish a book with O'Reilly. And then I started Googling. This was my solution to everything. I was like, okay, how do I do this? And so I went on Google and I searched for how to publish a book. And I found a bunch of varied results. And then I got more specific. I said, how do I publish a book with O'Reilly? And the answer was TLDR, you just have to know someone. You have to know someone through a conference. You have to know someone through a meeting. You have to be networked. And for me, as a like 13-year-old sick child with a fatal illness in Qatar, I was like, oh, I guess I'm just not part of this. Um, you mentioned in your initial discussions with O'Reilly, you got together with your editor in Austin, and that's where it started. I'm
At
curious,
South by, which by the way is happening right now at the time of this
South by
recording.
Southwest.
South by has invaded the city, but yeah, Simon was in town for South by, and that's where we met and
So
chatted.
so for the people listening to this who maybe have the dreams that I had when I was 13, right? Oh, I want to publish a book with O'Reilly. How can they do that? How can we make that accessible to them? What's their best way to start those conversations besides flying to Austin and going to South by?
Right? Yeah, don't do that. Don't spend thousands of dollars to fly to South by Southwest. Um, well, I think you have a really good point. Um, I and a really important question. I kind of want to answer this slightly circuitously, but I hope in a helpful way by saying I want to go back to why I give the content away, but also sell it, and there is nuance there, and this is how I kind of want to answer this question. Um, if you take what you can read on the GitHub repository versus a PDF or an EPUB or something like that, an actual ebook, if you will, if you take the difference between those two, it's not super significant, right? It's still seeing the same content on a screen on a device, but it is not exactly the same. There is a lot of formatting involved, there is a lot of readability involved. And that's exactly what I tell people when I talk to them about reading the books. I always say, read it for free online. If you like it, I always appreciate you buying copies. And I've had people come along and say, well, why don't you just format your GitHub repository into the, basically ebook format? And there's all kinds of projects, and people have done it where they've like written little or used tools and they export the markdown into these PDF files and things. And I've always pushed back and said, please take that down. I'm not authorizing that, because the distinction between my content, which I do want you to read, and the thing that I also would love it if you buy, is the extra effort to optimize a reading experience, right? I'm optimizing this reading experience by doing formatting and additional editing and typesetting and all of these other sorts of things. And when I was working with O'Reilly, they had experts that did that. But now I have to do that myself as a self-published author. And so I don't have any trouble justifying in my mind that there's a distinction between this format, which is the same content, but it's maybe more preferable for some people to read in that format. And that's a format that I sell. And I'm selling the fact that I went to the effort to take that content and do it. You could do that yourself. I just don't want you to do that and then give that away, right? Like, but you could go to the effort to convert it with a tool and format it and do whatever. So the reason I point out that distinction is that the thing that a publisher is best at when you're getting started, kind of like what you mentioned, is giving you structure, right? They are giving you the timelines and deadlines, and they're not mean about it, but they're like, hey, look, you promised by June we'd have the book, so where is it, right? So they give you structure, they give you support, they have experts that know all of these things. They're accelerating some of your self-learning process. And by learning, I mean learning how to do that work, but learning also how to keep yourself on track. These are all things that are learnable, knowable, and doable. Every single person that's listening, if you've ever written anything longer than a tweet, you are capable of formatting what you've written and what you're passionate about and what you're interested in into a book form. You just are, period. You don't need to get a contract from O'Reilly to become an author. That is one path. It's a path I took. It's a path you took. It's a path many people have taken, but it's not the only path. And there are some analogies that we could draw between that and the age-old debate of self-learning versus college, which, by the way, is a stupid, uh, dichotomy, because I've self-learned way more than I got in college. Virtually all of what I use was self-learned, but I also went to college, so those are not exclusive either. But getting an education from working with O'Reilly is one path, and there are people out there who that will be their right path for. But you absolutely do not have to go that path. So you don't have to go get a network introduction to get to O'Reilly, to get published, to then have your chance at the rest of the world. I have attempted, this is not really trying to pitch anything because not many people take me up on it, but when I did self-publishing, one of the things I found out is that sometimes when you want to negotiate distribution with foreign translators or publishers or certain digital platforms, they want what's called an imprint, which is literally just a logo and a name that says I'm a publisher, right? So I made an imprint called Getapub, and that's what I self-publish under, is Getapub. And then I thought, well, all this stuff that I'm learning about typesetting and all these things, those are things that other people could learn, but maybe I could also be a consultant to help with. So literally, I have a Getapub self-publish assistance consultancy thing that a couple of times I've had some calls with people and helped. I don't think I've ever charged a single dollar for it. Like, in theory, it would be a consultancy that was making me money, but it's such a low volume that people, reach out and ask. And I'm, again, nowhere here am I like trying to advertise, do this, but the point I'm trying to make is that the knowledge is attainable without feeling like you have this gatekeeping in front of you that you don't know the right someone's at some special company. O'Reilly Media is by far not the only publisher. There are quite a few others. And there's virtually an infinite canvas available to you to self-publish. There are things that'll be harder. The marketing's harder. The learning of all of these things, it's harder. But that is not the same as I can't become a published author without going through that particular gate. There's many other gates, and many of them are completely open, and all they cost is your time, right? So what I do when I do my self-publishing now, I use a platform called Leanpub, and it's fantastic. They have this set of tools where I literally write in Markdown and bam, they make the whole damn thing like fully formatted. Yes, I go through and like make tweaks and edits. It takes a while, but like they have all these great tools that support you. They have this fantastic like sales platform where people can pick their own price. You can set like a minimum and people can just pick how much they want to pay. And people do pick more than the minimum based upon the value that they see in things. So I use Leanpub, and anybody out there could use Leanpub. And by the way, if you use a platform like that, yes, you're doing more of the learning. Yes, you're doing more of the marketing and effort. But I don't mind disclosing, since the contract is a decade old and no longer in force, I got a 10% royalty in my contract, which meant 90% of every dollar, 90 cents of every dollar that O'Reilly brought in, they kept. And they kept that to cover all of that effort that they did, all of the learning that they had done to figure it out, all of the marketing, all of that stuff. And I don't begrudge them that. I do kind of wish I'd had more of that 90%, but I don't begrudge them that. That was their thing. Leanpub takes 20%. Okay, so there's a huge difference between taking 90% and taking 20%. And that's what I would like to say to anybody that's listening and thinking about being an author, is that I don't actually think you need to know somebody to do this. But that doesn't mean that that's the wrong path for some of you. Some of you, that might be the right path. And probably the best way to get introed is to talk to somebody that just published, aka Tejas, and be like, hey, Tejas, introduce me to your editor, right? Like, that's what a lot of people do. So it's not actually that outlandish to say anybody listening here has an in, they could get an intro if they felt like that was really their best path.
Yeah, and that's totally true. I actually will go on record and say that I did speak to one of the senior producers at O'Reilly, a good friend of mine, Amanda, and she was like, hey, if you ever want to make an intro, that's fine. I'll take it. She's super welcoming and she's not gatekeepy at all. I did ask her because a number of my friends, as you can imagine, did reach out and was like, hey, I like that thing you did with O'Reilly. Can I do it? Can you introduce me? And that puts me in a bit of a precarious position because
Sure.
I don't know if they're open to it. I don't know if they consider it spam from me. So I did ask, and it turns out they don't. They're just like, yeah, the more the merrier. So yes, if you're listening to this podcast and you want to publish specifically with O'Reilly, I can probably help with that. But you mentioned, I like that you draw this distinction of anybody can publish, either self-publish or so on. For me, I felt gatekept because I wanted to publish with O'Reilly because O'Reilly, I've heard, is like has this incredible reputation and so on. I wasn't as a child, I wasn't thinking about royalties because my parents gave me plenty of that. But now I see the appeal of and I need to be clear. Like I'm more than comfortable with the distribution of royalties I get with O'Reilly, and I'm super happy about it. In fact, I didn't even write the book thinking about money at all. I'm sort of like you this way, Kyle, and I consider that a blessing where through consulting work and hopefully one day in the not too distant future from this podcast gives me more than enough money to live where I don't have to. I can give away my book for free. That's the hope. And I'd like to be able to give away the content on this podcast for free. In fact, I do because of some sponsors, but it's definitely not enough. Anyway, you talk about self-publishing. I want to dig into this because you mentioned you got and what was it, an imprint yourself. You
An
created
imprint.
this like little publishing house, the Kyle Simpson publishing house, Getapub.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and then you talked about Leanpub. I want to maybe clarify the distinction between these. Is Leanpub also a publishing house, and does it have an imprint? Meaning, are Getapub and Leanpub sort of the same, except Leanpub is it caters to more people than just you?
Okay. Good questions. They're not at all the same thing. So what is Getapub? Getapub is literally just me saying, if you self-published author have written some stuff, but now all the other things, I kind of lay it out on my site in like these 3 levels. And like level 1 is just I come up with some content, I figure out what I want to say, I organize it, whatever. Level 2 is I'd like to do a little bit more than just have it on GitHub or just have it in a PDF printed export, right? Like I would like for it to have page numbers, and I'd like to have a title page, and I'd like for there to be images and a common font going across it. Level 3 is I'd like to have a more coherent brand strategy and distribution, and how do I work with foreign translators, and how do I negotiate what's fair for those, and all of that stuff, right? There's a ton of that learning. I'm not an expert in it, but I've walked down that road more than many people listening. And I said, if you ever get to the point where you want to go from level 1 to maybe 2 or 3, I wouldn't mind selling some of my time to help other people with those efforts. So that's what Getapub is. And all it means is that I have a domain name, I have a logo on that domain name. And the only, from a gatekeeping perspective, there were certain ebook distributors who would not talk to authors, they would only talk to imprints. And so I said, look, one of the advantages of having Getapub be, a publishing assistant for you is that you can use the Getapub imprint if you're trying to distribute yourself somewhere and they say, oh, you're an author, we don't talk to you. You just write them from an email and be like, I'm Getapub, and I'm the publisher of this book, and maybe that gets you in the door. That was all that was. Okay. That's Getapub. Leanpub is an entirely different thing. They are a big, successful platform that has hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of authors. They are specifically I think maybe the premier platform for self-publishers to not only create their works and to create their works incrementally. One of the great things about Leanpub is that you can publish a book when you have your first sentence, and you can literally just keep republishing as you get updates. So you could go page at a time, chapter at a time, whatever. You don't have to wait until the whole thing's done to publish, and you can set different sales prices and all kinds of it's a fantastic platform. They've got tons more that I'm not even saying. I didn't come on here to be like promoting them. I'm not financially associated with them in any way, but I've published 3 books through them, and I like them. I think they're great. But anyway, so that's what they are. Is they are all these tools to help people get their stuff out and get it sold and all of that. That we're not competitors in any way. We're just very different things.
Okay, and so they have this authoring experience where you can write your book, you can publish versions as much as you want. Are they a publishing house though? Like, do they also take care of distribution and marketing and getting it out of? Okay, so they don't. So they just it's just an authoring experience tool.
Right. So when for example, when you publish, you get download links for a PDF, an EPUB, a couple of other formats or whatever. And if you want to do print, they can even export it into like the layout files that the print publisher needs. So that's what I do is I take my stuff from Leanpub and I reformat, I make a few tweaks and edits or whatever, and I take it over to Amazon KDP, which is their self-publishing author platform. And I import my ebooks into Amazon so I can sell my Amazon EPUB formatted books or whatever. And then I import my print copy, and I did my own cover design. I had an artist, but we did our own cover design, import all that, and then I can sell print books through Amazon's KDP program. And I can also take those and go to other ones, although right now Amazon KDP is enough and I don't do any others. But I have all of that, all of the assets that I need from Leanpub, but it's still my job to go and do those things. So I occasionally get a Polish company comes to me and says, we want to translate your books. And I have to provide them the assets that I have in Word doc or PDF format, negotiate a contract. So I'm still doing all of that. Leanpub just got me to the point where I had ready to go usable assets.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that clarification. So what we're doing together here is creating this like pipeline for somebody to go from I have an idea to I'm a published author. And I think I just want to pause here and thank you for making that so clear, right? You have an idea, you write a manuscript, you can use Leanpub to write it. You then get the assets and you either self-publish using your imprint through Amazon KDP or other media. But this sounds like a really awesome formula and practical takeaway to make publishing books accessible to literally everyone. And, I know some people who think maybe self-publishing isn't as prestigious as having a big fancy author like O'Reilly. However, you do get more money from self-publishing, but maybe you don't get the reach. And so it's entirely possible, I feel like, that if your self-publish is good enough for O'Reilly to think it's great, then they might reach out to you after. And so I like that and I appreciate that you point out that the only limiting factor is your time. And a lot of these things are available, and not just available, but available at zero cost. Can we talk about learning? You're an educator. I think if that's the word I would use to describe you, right? You describe yourself as, I believe, a JavaScript theologian. We can talk about that, but Kyle Simpson, the educator, Kyle Simpson, the person who taught me JavaScript. You mentioned books as an avenue for learning, not by reading, but by writing for O'Reilly and so on. And you also mentioned university wasn't as helpful as books. I wonder if we can dig a little bit into that distinction. And I ask this because I'm somebody who never went to university. I was too sick. That's probably a discussion for another time. But I always felt like something was lacking. I felt like something, because the job interviews I had early in my career were predicated on having a computer science degree. And there was a lot of gatekeeping behind that. So I felt like I didn't fit because I didn't have the college education. Above and beyond that, during job interviews, there was a lot of terminology thrown around. What's the big O runtime complexity of this? And a lot of that stuff I learned from your book, especially the chapter on algorithms. So how does that affect me today? And then what I want to do is outline sort of a path for learning to the end of an ideal career for listeners. Okay, how that affects me today is I do have a really beautiful career that I'm extremely thankful for, in large part, again, thanks to your education and content. But I still feel like something's lacking. Like I still feel like I'm not, capable of doing machine learning type work because you need lambda calculus for that. And that's a college class I never took because I never went to university. I still feel like something's lacking. To the point where I overcompensate for it. So on social media, if I make a claim and it's about like health or wellness or something like this, I will always provide like PubMed articles, like scientific citations, because I'm so like, I feel inadequate because I never went to I don't have an academic background. Can we talk a little bit about education, gatekeeping in the interview process, and college?
Wow, that's just a tiny little topic, man. That's not a huge mountain for us to dig into. Yeah, absolutely. And I want to kind of almost go in reverse order in terms of addressing something that you said
Which,
about.
so I apologize to interrupt you, but I also want to add one more thing, which is I know that these books I heard through the grapevine came through you getting rejected from a job at Twitter,
Yep.
where they said you don't know JavaScript, and that's where the title
Yep.
comes from. So if we can tie all that together with that context, I think this would be very interesting for the listeners.
Okay. So first thing I want to say, you kind of summarized one of my positions, and I want to clarify on what is the role that college played in my education, and does that mean anything for what role that might play for other people? The reason why college, the college degree that I have, which is a computer science degree, the reason why that it's not zero, but the reason why it plays decreasing role in what I do is not because there was not value there, but because time has passed. A lot of time has passed. I'm old. Look at my gray beard. A lot of time has passed since I went through college. And college, by nature of its format, is kind of a you learn this snapshot of what we can teach you right now, and we hope that enough of that is universal that it'll keep being useful. My first year out of college, a lot more of my college degree was useful. My second year, it was decreasing. My third year, it was decreasing. So that if I'm going to make any comment about learning, the thing that I'm going to make is that any resource, including my books, are vanishingly less useful if you take them as snapshots that you check off on a checklist and say, I'm done with that. The way that you do when you go through college and you finish college, right? If you read my book 10 years ago, today my book is much less valuable to you than it was the day after you read it. And I've always tried to tell people the reason I wrote that book series and the reason I wrote the book series and titled it the way that I did was because I wanted it to be seen as not a single event, but rather a ongoing journey. And that's part of the reason the title we can get into in a second, but the title was misunderstood by at least some in the first edition. And I added the word yet to the second edition, not just to distinguish it as a second edition, but to really try to like hammer over people's heads. That's what the whole point was. The whole point was not, I'm saying here's a snapshot of what you know, and here's a snapshot of what I know, and look how much more I know than you. That's not the point. The point was, no matter where you are, this is a never ending arc. And I might be further along that arc because I've asked more questions about JavaScript than you have. And I think I've asked more questions about JavaScript than maybe 5 other people in the whole world, right? Like, I think I have asked a lot of questions about JavaScript and chased down a lot of answers down a lot of really deep rabbit holes. That just means that I'm further along that arc than somebody else, but it doesn't mean that I had some kind of special access to knowledge or anything. And I tried to write these books as saying, adopt the attitude that your learning and knowing JavaScript, to use the terminology of the title, is not a singular event, but a process and a journey. And I continue to be on that journey. I continue to learn things. I continue to have forgotten things that I knew before and then have to remind myself. It happens on occasion. Somebody will quote something from one of my books, and I'm like, I know I wrote that because my name's on the cover, but I don't remember writing that or why I said that way. And I have to like refresh my context. I've forgotten the majority of what I've said. So just to dispel that and to kind of lay out, my college degree was absolutely useful. And I've said this on many occasions in public social media posts. I'm grateful for my CS degree. It is not a necessary step. to becoming a very great engineer. But it does put you much more quickly on the track of being an engineer mindset, which is I want to understand problems before I solve them. The self-taught path more optimizes for I want to solve problems. Whether or not I understand them becomes a little less relevant, but I want to churn things out, and I want to put things out there, and I want to get the satisfaction of delivering an app to production and all of that. And both of those are necessary and useful for our industry. So I'm not disparaging either one, but they do have some differences. So you can do some of one or both or neither of either, there's no one path for that. But any path that you choose that you then finish with that and say, I'm never going to revisit that, I'm done with that, it will become vanishingly less useful to you over time. That's just the nature of this. Our industry is changing too much, and there's no way that what I learned 10 or 20 or 30 or more years ago is still relevant today. Like it's getting smaller and smaller. And what's really relevant to me is the stuff I've learned in the last couple of years. So my learning process was informed by what I knew before. I got more out of that learning process. I'm a product of my whole career, but I'm not going back and saying, like you mentioned lambda calculus. I took a lambda calculus class and I still can't do machine learning, deep stuff. Like I'm not qualified to do that. And I actually took that course. So that course 20 years ago is not doing for me what if I were to go and like refresh those things would do for me today. Circling a little bit further back in your question to try to tie any of that into what does it mean? How does education end up applying to the workplace and through interviews? It is true that I was already a published author with the HTML5 cookbook and was already a conference speaker on the international conference circuit and known for talking about JavaScript. And I had friends that worked at Twitter and they said, man, you'd kill it. You got to come to our team. And I interviewed with that team and my friends were like, you killed it. You did awesome. You're going to be great on this team. And then I didn't get an offer. And rather than just like accepting the being ghosted, I pushed on him and I was like, it's fine if you're not going to give me an offer. It had been like a month or something. I was like, it's fine if you're not going to give me an offer. But I flew all the way out there to San Francisco and spent a day of doing all this interview and stuff. Like, I think I deserve at least some concrete feedback on why, especially since I know people on the team who interviewed me and they said I was great. Why? Like, what didn't fit? And they didn't want to give me an answer. They hemmed and hawed for like a whole week. And finally, they came back and the recruiter said, one of our interviewers said he didn't really think you knew JavaScript that much. And I wish that I could say that I took that moment with grace and composure. I didn't.
I can imagine.
I started laughing at the recruiter, like in a very sarcastic way. I didn't take it with as much grace as I would take it now. But that was a piece, not the only part, but that was a piece of a seed that was planted in me of, well, do I? I think I do. A lot of people who come to my conference talks think I do, and the organizers of these conferences think I do, and an O'Reilly editor thinks that I know a lot about JavaScript. But do I? And so I set about to sort of introspect on myself. Do I know this language? At that point, I'd been writing JavaScript mostly full time for more than a decade. I was known internationally as pretty good at JavaScript, and I had to ask the existential question, like, do I? There was another set of input or feedback seeds planted in my mind that caused me to doubt whether I knew it, because I was trying to participate in, like, say, the 2000 time range up until 2011, 2012. That period of time, I was trying to be active on the standards list for the TC39 body that runs, approachable now than it was back then, I'll just say. But I was lurking on the list and I had ideas. I was like, well, what if JavaScript could do this? And I consistently got feedback in the form of the replies from people. I consistently felt like I was basically being told, you don't know enough about what you're talking about to even be part of this discussion. Because the
Wow.
replies I would get were, I don't, some of them were mean spirited on purpose, but a lot of them were just, look, we're up here and we're using terminology. And if you don't know what MOP means, GTFO, right? MOP. I don't know if you've ever tried to Google for mop, but I was like, what the fuck does mop mean? I don't know what that means. Like, and it was just, that's one example. And I'll tell you what it means in a second. But like, there was just this constant drumbeat of, we've already spent a lot of time thinking about all this, and we have all these acronyms and all this back history, and you don't know about the E language. Well, they already tried that in E and it failed. And there was so much history that I didn't know, so much terminology I didn't know. And I was like, man, I guess I just don't know enough to like be useful in JavaScript, like in the way I wanted to be useful in JavaScript. And so in 2012, when I'm pitching the books, I'm like, I know some stuff about JavaScript, but basically, I'm going to lay out a structure for a series of books that are going to have some pretty empty chapters, and they're going to represent my self-learning journey. I'm going to go learn the things and then write down what I learn about them. I'm going to go ask these questions, and I'm going to keep asking questions until somebody sufficiently gives me a good answer, not just the typical BS that people throw around. And that's what I did. So the writing of those books that completed in 2014 and 2015 are a bit of a microcosm or a snapshot of my learning process. I set about to learn JavaScript much more fully, and I determined in my mind that, number one, I was never going to go to a job interview again and they were going to be able to legitimately say you don't know JavaScript. And I said, number two, I don't ever want to go to the standards list and be told you don't know what you're talking about. And it was a defiance, it was a pride thing and a defiance thing. I said, I'm going to solve that, but I'm going to do it in a public way so that I'm not the only one who can benefit from it. That's the only difference. I was driven by, I would love to say that it was all the good spirit and the good of my heart to do it. I was driven by this personal animus, to the chip on my shoulder of being told that I wasn't good enough. And I said, I'm going to figure out how to be good enough. And in the course of that, realized I'm never going to be good enough. It's going to be a constant journey, but I'm going to ask more questions than anybody else. I'm going to build that muscle, that superpower of asking those questions. And I'm going to do so in a way that hopefully creates this field guide, to borrow the terminology from people that go on hikes, right? I'm going to try to make a field guide that as you go on your journey and you go exploring in a very different path than me, when you're walking along the way and you see this plant, you don't know what it is, and you open up the field guide, I want this to help you understand what that is and what you should do about it. That's poisonous. Stay away from it. That's good food. You're hungry, you can eat it, right? Like in the spirit of that. That's what I decided I would build. From that, a couple of big things happened to me. I became largely less employable, I'll say, because I decided to put myself out there in this very different and very hyper-focused mode. And largely the rest of the industry didn't go that direction, didn't go in the super deep, hyper-specialized mode. And most of the industry moved on in multiple waves into more and more higher levels of abstraction on top of JavaScript, basically trying to separate ourselves as far as we can from the language and still be able to use it as a tool. All of the TypeScripts and the frameworks and all these things that the industry now recognizes as the actual standards for modern JavaScript development. And I basically set myself completely apart from any of that. I didn't learn any of that stuff. I didn't embrace any of that stuff. And I kept my focus on understand this language at least as good as anybody else, if not better than everybody else, and never be told again, you don't know enough about this to be part of the conversation or to get the job. So I kind of, there are good parts and bad parts. And one of the bad parts is that, it moved me out of I can just go get any old JavaScript job anymore. I'm not that. We can come back to my employability later, but there's a lot of facets to that, but that's one of them. But another thing that it did is that it allowed me to not be. Let me say it this way. One of my favorite people in the world, Rick Waldron, he was on TC39 committee for a long time. I don't know if he still is or not, but he honored me by writing the foreword of one of my books. And in the foreword of one of my books, he gave me one of the greatest compliments, maybe almost as good as your compliment when you told me thank you for my career. But he gave me one of the greatest compliments I ever had, because he said, Kyle is delightfully, I think I'm getting this exactly, but somebody could go get the exact quote, but delightfully unaffected by the zeitgeist of modern JavaScript. And I was like, you're right. I am delightfully unswayed by any of the bandwagon stuff that comes along, and I've stayed to this course, and that has given me the ability to impact in ways that I never would have had if I just kept pursuing, go get this job. Like, I had the chance to impact this world in a way that I didn't imagine. And that forayed itself into all the courses that I've been able to teach. And for almost a decade, that's, how I paid my bills, really. I didn't pay the bills on the books. It made some money, but I paid my bills by teaching courses, which came from the books. People would read a book of mine and then go to their boss and say, this guy's great, we should bring him in. And I got jobs teaching corporate workshops all over the world. And I'd still be doing that today if it weren't for COVID. It ended that business model. But, that decision making that I took is not, I don't put that out there because I'm trying to suggest here's a template for other people to follow. But whatever path you're on, I do think that you should embrace that no job is going to be the sufficient snapshot of who you are and of what your skills are. It's a step along your journey, right? And the step along your journey can always include you asking more and driving deeper. And that includes if you get into an interview process and some jerk tries to show off that they know more about it by asking you some kind of stupid trivia question or, some weird nuanced quirk of the language or something like that. I get people that come back to me a lot and tell me that they read my books in preparation for an interview. They go into the interview and they answer according to what I say, and then they don't get the job because the interviewer is expecting a different answer. And then they come back to me and they're like, what do I do with this information? And I don't mean to be glib about it, but my response is, I wouldn't want to work there. If they put somebody out there to interview and they ask questions about JavaScript and that person hasn't invested enough to try to learn the language and they reject you because you give the right answer, I put them in the same bin as I put Twitter. Twitter didn't want me. That's okay. The funny addendum to that Twitter story, though, that I always get a kick out of is that the first big open source project that I was known for before You Don't Know JS, what kind of got me into the conference speaking scene, was Lab.js, which was a dynamic script loader. And I had that out there. I had done some pretty public things with some folks like Steve Souders, who's a big web performance guy back in the day. We'd done some collaborations on stuff and I'd done talks on it. So it was a somewhat known project, but it's not like, React is today or something. There was no Lab.js conference, right? But it was a well-known project. 3 months after I was rejected by the Twitter interview, Twitter did the first big full in-house redesign of their app. They've designed 20 times since then, but they did the first big rebuild, full. I think that was when they moved off of Rails or something, but it was a full redesign, relaunch or whatever. And when they launched, guess what little tiny JavaScript library was included in the big set of stuff? Twitter used Lab.js. And so it was kind of funny. It's like, I don't know enough about JavaScript, but I'm good enough at writing a library that you'll use it on twitter.com. Anyway, if anybody is out there, if you're trying to get any takeaway from this, if you interview with some company or if you're working for some boss at some company and they don't share the value that there's always more to learn and that it's okay to say that. I don't know yet, and I'm learning it more. If that value is missing, please try to find somewhere else to be. That's the value that was missing at Twitter. They weren't trying to like help me be better. They were like looking for an excuse to say, no in the most like sarcastic way possible. And I took that and I used it as a chip on my shoulder to maybe do some bigger good. But that wouldn't have been a good place for me to work. I'm not saying anything about the company or who worked there, but it wouldn't have been good for me. And I'm kind of glad maybe that I didn't go work there, because that wasn't a value I share. And that's the only thing I can say is, if you find a place that doesn't value knowledge and truth and fact and learning as an ever present part of the process, I don't think that's a place you ought to spend your time.
Yeah, and also amen to that. And also, if you're working in a place that, as Planet Scale does, prioritize profit over people, I assume there's similar sentiments there. Thank you for that answer. I love how you capture. I did ask a big question, and I really appreciate how you answered every detail of that question. When you were talking about becoming less employable because of your deciding to not sort of go broad but go deep in JavaScript, I'm starting to feel that as well. And this is something I wasn't expecting, something that wasn't on my bingo card for 2024. But this happened to me. I went on a vacation, and I came back from my vacation. And as you may or may not know, the main way I pay my bills is consulting business, particularly developer relations consulting. The podcast is not there yet in terms of sponsorships, and I don't do like influencer stuff. I don't do pay me and I'll be your like AppWrite brand ambassador or whatever. Now, if AppWrite wants to sponsor the podcast, that's a different discussion. But I don't. I try not to do a lot of this influencer type stuff. I also make like $15 a month from YouTube. But anyway, the main way is the developer relations consulting. And so I went on this vacation, right? I came back from the vacation, and literally the same day I landed, was told by one of the primary clients that they've decided to half everything in our arrangement. And
Nice.
and I was very surprised, because in my mind, and I will stand by this, I was doing my best. And so I was indeed very surprised, because for me, I just didn't compute. I was doing the best job I could. Um, any needles that we identified that needed moving were moving, although maybe not in the way that some wanted. They were still moving, and so I was blindsided. And now I will say this: it wasn't instant. They said, we'll have everything, but we'll give you 3 months to find something else. So it wasn't like we're having this today. Goodbye. And so at least there was some grace there. However, I asked why, similar to you at Twitter, and I got back a number of reasons I couldn't fully parse and understand at the time. Partially because I was so shocked, but also because it sounded like double speak to some degree. And I'm not accusing anyone. It just in my emotional state, I maybe heard it that way. But what I was told in the end was, well, you got you just published your book, and LinkedIn's going nuts, and there's like 300 reshares, and everybody's talking about your book, and you're also doing this podcast, and these are really long form episodes, and so you're doing all this stuff. So we feel like this contract is really a half-time contract. It's not a full-time contract. The contract, by the way, is a 32-hour week, 4-day contract. So that was what I heard, and for me this was interesting and surprising, because if it's a 4-day, 32-hour contract, there's plenty of time on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for me. It is Friday today as we're recording this podcast. You know what I mean? So I was very surprised that that was where it was coming from. And I do feel that going as deep as I do in the podcast, in this case, we're going pretty deep on publishing yourself. For people listening, I thought we would go deep on JavaScript. We're instead going deep on writing a book, and I'm here for it. We are still going pretty deep. And also on employability and so on. I do feel like the pool from which I can have clients is shrinking because of that depth. And I find that so interesting. All that to say, I hear you about being less employable, and I heavily resonate with that, which is kind of nuts that we tend to, or the industry rather, tends to prefer generalists to specialists, it sounds like. But I do want to circle back to one question that you mentioned. What does MOP mean?
There we go. Yeah. MOP. I'm glad you did ask it because I was thinking in my mind, I did never say that. Meta Object Protocol, which is a fancy way of describing how objects in JavaScript work. Like, for example, the fact that there's a prototype chain where a property can be referenced, in the parent prototype instead of in the object or whatever. It's just the catch-all term that describes all of the different facets of how JavaScript's objects link together and behave, how property lookup happens, what happens when the property is not there, how do you make a property read-only, all that stuff. All of that big umbrella, that's all called MOP, Meta Object Protocol.
Awesome. Thank you. Meta, had you not clarified that, I would have thought it had something to do with Meta, the company.
Right.
Anyway, okay, we'll slowly start wrapping up here, but I do want to ask two more categories of questions based on what you've said. And I just, again, want to applaud you for sharing all this content that then just inspires me to ask more questions about it. You said resources, and I love that you said this. I want to frame this and put it like on a wall in my house. You said resources are not snapshots. Learning resources are not snapshots. And you've identified the problem with academia is that they teach you stuff that is useful but not relevant today because it hasn't yet caught up. I hope I'm not misrepresenting what you said, but that's sort of what I understood. And so the question here is for those listening, and frankly for me, HTML is a living standard, meaning it's continuously evolving. You wrote one of the books on HTML. So, like if learning is not a snapshot, but rather a living standard, how does one continue to learn in a living way? And maybe we could talk about how you continue to learn in a living way.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I've said this before on a number of occasions, so it may sound familiar to folks, but if you think about certain disciplines, like, for example, lawyers and doctors, they use the term practice to refer to their actual work product. Like, I have a law practice, I practice law, I have, a doctor. These are that term practice, and we kind of sometimes gloss over that, but I think there's more value to mine just from that mindset. Also, in those professions and in many others, it is an accepted practice, and it is an accepted requirement of that discipline, of that profession, that they have to go through what they call continuing education, right? Accountants go through it, doctors go through it, lawyers go through it. They have to go through continuing ed, and they're required by their certifications, by the letters that they hang on the wall, to keep doing that stuff. And we have this profession, engineering, where we basically just treat this kind of ad hoc. It's like the only learning that we really culturally emphasize is when somebody invents a new library, then you go learn the new library. But why is there not a bigger culture of us saying, I continually have to go back and review the things that I know and look for deeper perspectives on the things that I learned before? Why is this profession only about our output? Why are we only a commodity? And we're only valued by the lines of code we can produce and the number of features that can translate to. And we're not valued for how much more mature we understand ourselves to be. A doctor who's been practicing for 20 years has seen way more cases and has way more wisdom to bring and is going to be valued more highly in the medical community. And now what I think we see is the longer you've been around engineering, the less likely you are to be listened to. You're thought to be too stubborn, too stiff, too stuck in your old ways of thinking, too inflexible, seen too many things. And what we prioritize, what we elevate, what we praise is the hungry 16-year-old who comes along and invents a whole new library. And that person is what we raise up and say, that's who we value. And that's who gets the highest paid salaries and that sort of thing. And so we've just sort of inverted ourselves to where not only is specialization not as valued anymore, but experience is not as valued anymore. I imagine, for example, there's not a single job out there that would hire me today and would say, we're really interested in the fact that you've been around programming since before there was an internet. What perspective could I bring to the table that somebody else who has been at this less time and never knew programming before the internet? I have a different perspective than that person. I also understand the entirety of the arc of the internet. I've been around for at least the web, if not the, a lot of the internet. But like, I have something to bring, but I don't think there's any job out there that would find value in that. And I could give another, a million other versions of that type of assertion. Because what is valuable right now is only what you can do with the latest and greatest thing. AI is saying, all the other stuff doesn't really matter anymore. We can generate all this stuff faster, and we can have access to all that knowledge faster. So it will, I think, become less and less common for companies to employ really, really senior people. As far as I can tell, beyond the 5 to 7 year mark of experience, your length of experience shifts from an asset to becoming, in some cases, a liability. I'm at 25 plus. It's become a serious liability. And I can't just lie and pretend that I don't have that experience, because a quick Google search is going to show you all the stuff that I've been for a long time. So how do I be valuable to some company from an employee perspective anymore? I tried very hard to parlay in my job search efforts. Disclosure here, it's early March. I've been unemployed now for over 5 months since my last job. I am working on a new venture right now, but I'm not employed by anyone. And I've looked a lot for jobs. And when I've tried to find a job, I've been trying to parlay to these companies that what you should value in me is not how many lines of code do you think I'm going to write? Because quite honestly, I'm a pretty slow coder. I'm not prolific. I don't write lots of lines of code. I think the lines of code that I write are pretty well thought out. They're pretty valuable, and they do what I say they're going to do, right? But I'll take all week long thinking about the 10 lines of code to write, rather than writing 100 lines of code each day and throwing away 99 of them each day. So I tell these companies, don't hire me because what you want is me to produce 1,000 lines of code a day. Hire me because you want me to spend the week figuring it out and make sure that what we do at the end of the week is where the real value is. And also hire me because I think I can speak a lot to the broader issues of engineering culture and what it means to have teams that work effectively with each other and share information with each other. And I can mentor and build education and build advocacy internally. That's where my real value proposition is. And virtually every company that, I don't get many interviews, but the tiny percentage of companies that interview me, they're like, that sounds amazing. We wish we could do that. But it turns out that really what we were looking for with this principal engineer job was just somebody that was going to like write 99% of the code. And I'm like, well, I'm not that guy. So thanks, but no thanks. It's just, we've moved the needle so far to the side of what matters in engineering is not what you know and what you understand or what wisdom you have in decision making. All that really matters is, can I use a tool, whether that tool is a ChatGPT looking tool or a CodePilot looking tool or an editor or a library or a framework, but can I use a tool to produce an outcome as quickly as possible with as little overhead as possible? That's the only value proposition anymore. And people like me don't register very high in that value proposition.
Yeah, I definitely see that, and this reminds me of a previous season's episode with Anjana Vakil. I don't know if you know Anjana, but we had this incredible discussion where we asked the question, we explore the question: is the dog wagging the tail, or is the tail wagging the dog in tech? Meaning, is tech serving people, or are people, or is the commoditization of people serving some type of like extreme capitalism in tech where output is the only thing that matters, and for whatever reason it looks the other way right now, exactly as you mentioned. Like, we'll prioritize. I still can't be fully comfortable, Kyle, by just knowing that Node.js is this runtime that runs most of the web. And I think I know where you're going with this, and this is not to disparage what I'm about not to disparage Bun, frankly, but Bun shows up as this new runtime written in Zig. And everybody's like, Node sucks, Node is old, Node is bad, Bun is great, Bun is fast, because it's a quote unquote drop in replacement for Node.js. And only then, after the hype sort of dies down, people go like, wait a second, it's not a drop in replacement of Node.js. And I was reading some documentation the other day for a library which had in its FAQ, why doesn't this work with Bun? And the answer was, well, because Bun, in some cases, doesn't function as a drop-in replacement for Node. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I don't fully know why it is that we prioritize the new as opposed to the proven. I've been in a number of engineering circles where even people like talk about Java or PHP like it's bad and evil. Yuck PHP, yuck Java. People will literally make fun of COBOL and things like this, which sure, they maybe as languages not used as widely. They still power most of the. I think the best example of this is jQuery, right?
Mhm.
Powers, I think, 90th percentile of websites. Someone will correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but still spoke of pretty poorly because React is the new hotness, and now React is spoken of poorly because the new hotness is solid.js and quick and svelte and astro, and I don't know what so I guess the unhealthy bizarro protocol to take away for listeners is just make something new and it'll be great. Right? Just make something new and it'll be praised until it's not.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm curious if any of that resonated, if you wanted to add anything there.
it did, and I
If not,
wanted I wanted to add on because you asked like, what does that look like for your steps forward? Like, how do you keep learning? And that's important. So my process for learning is picking something that, and I naturally gravitate to the things that are not already well mined, right? Like, I didn't go write a book about React because there's a million other people out there who know it better than I do, including my gracious host on this podcast. Those are the people that should be talking about that stuff, right? I'm going after things that people don't know so much about. Like, literally at the moment right now on my other screen, I have a whole bunch of code. I am digging in and trying to learn the web authentication API, the thing that lets you do passkeys like Touch ID and Face ID and all that stuff. I have a very specific usage of it that I'm trying to do, and it's non-standard or whatever. And I'm like way, way deep in the weeds, like learning this stuff. I am constantly learning, but I'm not learning something like, what's the new hotness out there so that I can go get a job. That's not what drives me to learn. What drives me to learn is, what is something that has usefulness packed into it that's not unlocked because it's overlooked or because somebody else said we don't even need to learn that thing, we can just build these abstractions on top of it, and they missed the value proposition. That's what I thought I saw about JavaScript in 2009 and 10 and 11 when I decided to write the book series and do training about it, was that JavaScript was getting overlooked, and I wanted to uncover its value propositions through the transfer of knowledge. And I also, another piece of the puzzle is I look for ways to leverage education as a battle against the power narratives that happen, like the power imbalances that happen. I think knowledge and education and transfer of knowledge is one of the most effective ways that mankind has ever fought against the power structures, the inherent power structures that happen, the structural biases that our systems create. The only way that we have really ever proven across generations to break out of those is through knowledge. That's just my view. I'm biased, but that's my view. And so I said, that's what I'm going to make my life about, is about trying to do that in little and small ways. I'm building something using web authentication, a little, it's going to be a little library that somebody can use. Probably 10 people in the world will use it, right? I'm not building the next React, but those 10 people, I really hope, will be much more effective with web authentication, because I sat down and said, this documentation is a total mess. This is crazy complicated. Somebody needs to figure out a more reasonable way of doing this. And my medium for that education is not going to be a book or a blog post. it's going to be some code. But there'll be other things that I will learn, and I'll think, well, the better way for me to do that is to go on my friend's podcast and talk about that. And then there'll be other
Awesome.
things where I'm like, the better books are just not the greatest medium these days to create things
Yeah.
because they take so much effort and then they're not really malleable. And we need more
Yeah.
malleable mediums for education and knowledge transfer. But,
Yeah.
maybe I'm not foreclosing. Maybe there'll be something else that my learning will come out in the form of me writing another book about it. But the reason I'm answering the question this way is because those two are inseparable to me. I cannot learn a thing simply because I want to know the thing. I'm incapable of that. Actually, that would be more effective for me if I could just turn my learning powers towards stuff that I want to learn. Everything that I learn, no matter what, even if it's far away from the computer screen. I'm into table tennis and I take lessons. I run a club and I take lessons and I'm trying to get better at table tennis. But guess what I'm thinking every single time I'm at the table? Could I show somebody else what I've learned about this stroke or this
Mm.
serve or whatever? Like, I can't turn that off. So my process for learning is figuring out, when I learn this thing, how will I use this to share with somebody else? And vice versa. If I see that there's a need for somebody to get something and I'm a way that they could get that, then I'm going to go and learn that and do that. Those two sides of that process, the learn and the do and then the share,
Mm.
there's no distinction between those. They're two parts of the exact same mental process. So I'm going to keep doing that. It's just, if you look at the broad arc of my career, I'm doing that in increasingly more smaller and more niche ways, right? Like, I was focused on JavaScript, the big language. And then for a number of years, and even still today, I focused on functional programming, and I was really interested in that, and I actually still am interested, and I'm even designing my own programming language because I'm really interested in finding a way to make functional programming more ergonomic. But that's way more niche than JavaScript, right? And then I'm talking about things like web authentication, which like 10 people in the world are ever going to write code for. It's just, the longer I go, the things that I find valuable to dig in and learn are less and less mass market appeal. But it's the inverse thing is that the less mass market appeal is, the more untapped value there is to pull out. And that's what's attracting me. It's pulling me more and more in those directions. So the things I care about, like the venture that I've started that we can talk about, is that it's prioritizing people owning their own data. This is a thing that I really care about. But if you look at the broad narrative of the way the web and applications are built, privacy is just some words that we put in a terms of service. It's a legal document. It's not actually a real principle that anybody builds businesses on. And me and my co-founders said, could we build a business where ownership of data and privacy is not inherently at odds with usefulness and monetization? Like, is that possible? Can we do that? So I'm the longer I go in my career, the further and further I get down into where the real value is, and conversely, just not as much attention. But that's always driven me. When there's something that doesn't have attention, that's my bat signal. It's like, that's getting overlooked. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
rushing to that.
Thank you for that answer. I think that's definitely a great lesson for everybody. As we wrap up, I do want to not finish this conversation, Kyle, without talking about that venture you just alluded to. Vella, we'll put links in the show notes, but if you could tell us a little bit about your new venture that you're, I believe, co-founding. You already mentioned it's privacy centric. It enables people to own their own data and, I believe, finances. So I'll let you talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Vella.ai, co-founded with this fantastic guy named Jonathan. He is actually the founder of a meetup group in a community movement called Local First Software Development. Local First has its roots back in, say, 2018 or 2019, but it shares a lot of similar passions to things that other people might know, like offline first, even things from the decentralized world, that drove some of what Web3 and crypto has become. The ideas were generally formed by a small consultancy called Ink and Switch. So if you're Googling for things, you might Google for Ink and Switch's kind of seminal paper on defining the term local first. I think that was in 2019 or something. But this community that has really started to grow, a lot of companies that are starting to come in and ask, could we build applications with this local first mentality? And the parts of that manifesto or that belief system that I adhere to the most are that user ownership of data, meaning when I create a piece of data, any piece of information that I create by interacting with a piece of software, that first and foremost is created on my device. I own it, and then I can take that and do with it what I want, which might be sharing it with others. It might be sending it off for other, usage purposes, but it defaults to keeping it for me. One of the reasons why that's important, of course, is control. Another is privacy. And if you think about the world of AI right now, it's taking the world by storm. But one of the biggest hallmarks of AI is we need your data. Give us more data so that we can make these bigger and bigger, more trained models, right? They're trying to take our data from us and create these huge models. And in exchange, they promise that we'll get so much more value out of it. But to me, it's this glaring red light. Like, why are we saying that that's an advancement of this industry to just even more blindly than ever before, just give more and more of our data away in hopes that maybe there's a return on that value? So Vella.ai is a smart assistant app. It's going to help sift through all the noise that you are currently experiencing in your digital life, like all your overload of notifications, or all the emails that you're getting of tracking your shipments on Amazon, or all the social media updates of your friends coming into town. There's too much noise, and you miss a lot of the really important stuff. And the way I would categorize or summarize this is, we can use AI to figure out the things that you needed before you went looking for it. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to make an assistant that does that. And we're going to do it in this local first mindset, meaning that we're going to run most or all of that analysis on your device instead of taking all of your data and shipping it off to yet another cloud provider that you don't own and you're not sure what they're doing with the data. We're going to build it privacy and local first centric. My particular interests right now in the company, like the things that I'm working on right now, the reason I'm looking into WebAuthn is because we need a concept of local first identity. What does portable and user-owned identity actually mean? If it's not just hook it onto my Google ID, what does that mean? And can we do that at scale? We need that. So we're going to be putting that first and foremost into Vella, and we hope that's a pattern and a template for other apps to bring that along. But again, the real theme here is that both Jonathan and I we're just deeply passionate about this space of local first and what that means and how that really could change the way that the web and apps at large are built if we start prioritizing that first. But we know that when people say that, it sounds great in theory, but then everybody's like, yeah, but how, right? So we're going to go build the how. We're going to go show you that it is possible, and then let other people, hook on to that. Rather than just talking about it, we're going to get in the weeds and do it. So the first app that we're going to build is this smart assistant, this AI assistant, Vella.ai. So that's what we're about. We're very passionate about that, and I think we're two sides of a really important puzzle. We also have a third guy, Tony, that's just recently joined us. He's a newer developer and super hungry and digging in the weeds and already producing a ton of value for us. So the three of us have partnered together, try to get this off the ground, see if we can get people interested in rethinking that instead of this cloud first and all my data's I have to rent my data back from other providers thing. What would it mean to be able to make monetizable business where the data stays with the people who create the data? I think that would be a very different kind of web that I would very much more enjoy being part of. And rather than just complaining about it, I'm going to try to do something to make that happen.
That is so noble. And, as you were describing that, guess what? I have a confession. I actually felt like building exactly the same thing. In fact, I started putting together like a business plan and a prototype and everything. However, the missing piece for me was local first. I did not build it in a local first way. But the things you talk about, for example, making your notifications work for you as opposed to interrupt you, um, top of my radar. And it's absolutely nuts that we have some overlap here. We should maybe talk offline about joining forces or something, because
For
I do
sure.
believe in that mission. But Vella.ai, if I look on the website, talks about like lending teams and um, commercial banking and stuff like
I
that.
think we
Is
might be
that
on the wrong. You might be on the wrong website. Then it's not about finance stuff. So
Vella? How do you spell?
VELLA.ai.
Okay. This is where I was
Glad we got the spelling
mistaken. I thought
correct.
it was yeah, yeah.
VELLA.ai.
Okay, I thought it was VELA. For everybody listening, it's VELLA. Oh, and it's
Two
launching in
L's.
52 days.
Yeah,
Kyle, you've got a hustle, man.
we've
Um,
we've got quite a bit ahead of us.
yeah. Well, hey, I would love to. I will go on record and say I would love to join that if
Very
and
cool.
when, because either way, I'm going to build it myself, and I would rather not compete here. I don't think we even would, but
There's
maybe a
one
discussion for
there's one
offline.
thing I want to specifically highlight when we're on the topic of Vela and on the topic of AI. And I mentioned that one of the things that excites me the most is this idea that we can do a lot, if not all, at least a lot of that AI analysis right on your device. Um, we're using AI in a somewhat different way than I think a lot of other people are thinking about AI right now. The most common modality of AI right now is the generative modality, meaning here's some text. Can you give me some other text back, right? Can we put in something and get some image out, or give me more text out, or whatever? Can we basically predict what is the best next set of tokens to come out of a system? But what's happening in AI, and I am certainly not deeply schooled in machine learning and all of that. I'm learning, trying to learn. My co-founder, Jonathan's really into this stuff, and this is much more his specialty. But what he's shared with me is like, in this AI space, to get to that generative step, there's a step that you go through, which are these embeddings, which is the semantic analysis of what it's currently seen, its context, and then these next steps are what is transforming and predicting all the tokens. We're basically just stopping at that semantic part and saying, let's get value out of that instead of needing to go the extra steps to do generation. Can we analyze all of this stuff and figure out that what you really wanted and you didn't even know you wanted was, you wanted to be told that your friend was in town and you should go have lunch with her or whatever, right? Like that's you might have found that accidentally if you got lucky. We're going to basically figure out what's relevant to you. I'm sort of coining this idea of relevance as a service. We're going to figure out what's relevant to you and surface that to you in ways that are going to feel like luck. They're going to feel like serendipity to you, because otherwise you might have just accidentally found it, seen the feed, or something like that. We're just going to find those things and learn what you would want to see. So you can think of it almost like a dashboard. It's going to bring up the things that are relevant to you.
I am. I've been shocked because this is all I was talking about. Excuse me, for the past 2 weeks with various friends and partners, and I can't believe we're building the same thing. And I'm finding out about it as we're recording with hot mics. Unbelievable. Um, I look forward to all the conversations that follow.
Yeah.
Um, but but for now, Kyle, listen, it's been such a pleasure. First of all, such a pleasure meeting you the first time I met you, but even more of a pleasure now having this rapport and friendship that we have. I've considered you nothing more than a personal hero and role model with your in-depth knowledge of JavaScript, and I'm sure I say this on behalf of not just myself but all the listeners. Thank you, thank you, thank you for coming on this podcast and sharing all of this deep knowledge with us. It's a real pleasure to listen to and learn from you.
I thank you. It's the friendship feelings are mutual. When we met, I guess almost about a year ago or so, we finally met in person. And man, I've been such a huge fan of what you've been up to, and I'm honored that this podcast effort that you've put together is had a place for me. The conversation's been fantastic, and I look forward to more like this. It's really good for my soul to be able to kind of like introspect in a useful way and share some of that wisdom and experience. And I hope other people are finding value there too.
Thank you. Thank you for joining my discussion with Kyle Simpson. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I especially hope you paid special attention to the part around the tech industry and gatekeeping and career and all of that, because I do believe that's fundamental to the future of the industry and our places in it collectively. I hope you enjoy the technical deep dives around JavaScript and the nuance around publishing, building a book, and so on and so forth. If you're learning from and or enjoying this podcast, I'd invite you to subscribe and like the video on YouTube, as well as leave a comment. Let me know if you enjoy it, if you want future guests, what you want to learn about, etc. This is all for you. Okay. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, I would encourage and invite you to leave up to a 5-star review. All of that stuff helps the podcast, and if anything, it's just a signal to me that this work, is worth doing meaningfully. And so your feedback is what drives the podcast and my motivation. So thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for supporting the podcast, and most importantly, thank you for your interest in engineering.